Peace, 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 family. This is your girl Najwa, Navi, whatever you want to call me today. Um, I scheduled this live for 5 p.m. and Pacific Coast time or Pacific Standard Time, and I just decided to come up here a few minutes early. There's a lot of stuff on my mind as far as social media and life and my life. But either way, with all of that, I've been trying not to come up here because some things been going on in my life. But um, what I'm seeing online is rather disturbing. Okay, and I hope you guys, one, are paying attention to what's going on, and two, that y'all don't get caught up in the fray and the push for content right now. Um, I hope y'all figure it out. Let's just put it like that. I hope y'all understand what's in the midst of what you're doing. Okay, um, the plays that are being had right now or trying to be had right now. Um, yeah, it. I sit up here and I look at like what I'm doing. I just read. Sometimes I, get a wild hair up my ass and bring some other things that I've run across and stumbled across to share with the people. But for the most part, I read, and you know that there's people out here who think that sitting up here and reading to people, reading books that they have not bought, purchased, or read themselves, are, it's beneath us. That it's something to be ridiculed. Okay, because what we have right now is a bunch of happy little suggestions. Okay, I'll show you a happy little suggestion. Happy little suggestion came from one brother who says that all the women up here are Eastern stars. And I just want to know, how do you become an Eastern star? Because I need to go back and look. Let me put it like this. People throw a lot of shit out here, okay? And a lot of the stuff that they throw out here is not true. Now, when you just talk about one person or two people or something like that, it kind of gets put to the side, hey, that's this person and that's that person, and I'll hold that as truth. But um, it's not anything that you're going to go and look into. But yet, the narrative continues to run because a lot of the people that are on here don't have the proper discipline to be online trying to share information with people. And, some folks um, will take any old thing that people say and run with it. So, just using one example, I'm an Eastern Star. How did that happen? What do you actually have to do to be an Eastern Star? Because the only way that somebody can say that I'm an Eastern Star is because I was learning from the Moors. Now, what was my oath? How did that work? What were my dues? Who did I pay them to? W- Did I become an Eastern Star by going with GSAMA, GSAMA, you know, declaring my Moorish nationality and all that stuff many years ago? Yeah, yeah, yeah. That ship has sailed. Okay. Um, or they ridicule you for just sitting up here and reading, just being a genuine human being in any regard. Whatever they can use to keep the narrative going. Like I was telling one brother, I said, you guys are calling yourself merging because of what's going on right now. You're merging two sectors, two different sectors that supposedly came up in this melee of bullshit that didn't happen in a few years. You have Aboriginal versus Indian, which is fucking funny as hell because at some point, let me just put it here, at some point, y'all gonna have to really figure out what that Aboriginal is standing for, because um, I think it's standing for British, Pan African, and a few other things more and the like. And um, in some times in the past, I'd be real upset about what I was seeing. But at this point, I realized that, as one brother said, it's just entertainment. Okay. That's all it is. But there's still some of us out here who will do what I'm doing, trying to get this information out, because we were serious about the shit until people started playing and placating, pimping and pandering and all that other shit. And so I'm still rocking with those folks. And mind you, everybody ain't getting 100 on it. No way, no shape, form. I mean, I'm not even getting 100% on this shit. Damn, my phone is hot already. Oh, hold on, you guys. Let me see if I can work this out. Come on, speed up. Okay. Hopefully we can cool that phone down a little bit. But yeah, I haven't been up here because there's been some personal things in my life that kind of had my full attention, and also um, I was trying to avoid making any commentary about the things that I was seeing online. Okay. This is the best I can do today. Okay, this is the best that I can do today to get back to the reading of the history of Ireland, and um, by Peter and Fiona Somerset Fry. Okay, this is the best I can do. I mean, y'all better pay attention, because, like I said, they're trying to merge two sectors. And as I told one brother, when the cream rises to the top, you guys deserve everything that you get. Okay, because no matter how we try to bring this information to unlearn things that we have erroneously learned from the school, from religion, from black power politics of the 60s and 70s and all this other shit, we're still going to have to deal with these naysayers that want to keep you with the out of Africa story, because that's all it really is. Okay. Um, as I said before, when certain people leave YouTube for a time or whatever the case is, the algorithm starts popping other shit up in here. And it's real interesting, because it's like YouTube be telling on folks. But there's a little difference in the algorithm right now, because you got people that want to play a particular narrative. We want to keep the Karen narratives going. We want to keep the either white people feel this way about black people, or uh, black people are victims because of X, Y, and Z, or the police videos that keep popping up. But it's a whole play. And to me, and this may not apply to you guys, um, people lacking some content right now. Okay. And so here we got this Carrie Mayo and Bat thing going on. And that's what I mean by when the cream rises to the top, you deserve what you get at the end of the day. Okay. Um, because y'all, you, we have difficulty in putting a hard line out there to say, hey, this is this and that is that, and these two don't meet. But because of most of the people in the community being so affiliated with people in the community, those lines get blurred. Hey, Jews. Okay. Those lines get blurred. And I just hope that when the dust settles from this current melee, um, that y'all ain't on the wrong side of this. Because there's a lot of people masquerading as other folks. Um, either way, either way, it is what it is. It is what it is. Y'all can see my voice is pretty deep right now because I'm a little tired. It is fucking hot as hell in California. I'm not sure what it is right now, but I open my door, I go outside, and I feel like I stepped into a dryer. Okay? Um, Apparently, we're in some kind of heat wave right now. Um, Putting social media aside, whatever it is that you need to do in your immediate life for your family, that should be what you concentrate on. Because this stuff is just for entertainment. Okay? Um, I was looking at, and I'll say this and then we'll try to get to this reading. I was looking at how, after all these years, and I've been up here for a good number of years, but after all these years, I'm seeing people who have been connected from probably as far back as Google Meetup or whatever the case is, been hanging with each other for a long time. And I got to thinking the other day, I said, after all these years, y'all ain't found one solution to put y'all all together? That's not an accident. No one's looking for a solution. So the only solution that you really have is wherever you are, you get yourself together, you get your family together, your finances together, you figure it out for you, because this whole collective of we gonna all come together, if y'all been paying attention, it ain't gonna happen. Because what we're looking at is a lot of personality worship. And as soon as you start to say, hey, I rock with this person, here come the people to cause that division within this so that you can't find a solution. Or people just trying to keep shit going because they need momentum on YouTube. Or people who have fallen off that need to get back on the YouTube wagon. Best thing you can do is take care of you and yours, because there are no solutions. There will be no getting together and everybody doing X, Y, and Z. It's an illusion. All right. Um, Let me go grab something to drink. I done had a couple shots today. I'm hoping some more can them go live later on, because I might, since I don't have a 2-year-old running around the house right now, I might be able to cuss and fuss with some folks, because that's what people like to do. Okay. Um, Let me take care of something real quick. See if I can get my voice right. Yeah, I just took my hair down a few days ago, and it's like, oh, um, yeah, we're not going to do that again, not for a while, because that shit started pulling my hair out. I'm not trying to lose my edges. Yeah, Um, but I finally got my hair back together. Whew. Um, Y'all have to forgive me right now. Excuse me right now. I'm trying to warm up something to drink so I can clear my throat. Whew, just a little bit. Um, yeah, and get this reading done. We don't have too much left to do in this book. I'm celebrating because this is the most that I've actually read of a book. I've read maybe 2, 3 chapters, maybe 4 chapters of a book, and I've let it go. This is the first book that I'm going through the whole book as promised. One of the things that we saw in the last parts of this book was how this Irish history parallels American history. For me, when I was reading the book, aside from seeing the parts about the nobles and the royals and the monarchy and different government and different things like this, the underclasses, um, the church, the Catholic versus the Protestant, coupled with the Presbyterian and all of that stuff, all the little things that was happening in the last few chapters. The other thing that I'm uh, The other thing that I see in here or saw in here was how they had a supremacy, the oath of supremacy. And I'm like, that oath of supremacy is the same shit as what we talk about today when we talk about white supremacy. That's what it stems off of. And the problem is that some people don't think that that has anything to do with so-called black people because some things that they don't want to recognize. Some people don't want to recognize, as people have said, black Europeans. Some people don't want to recognize black Dutch. On the other side of that, some people don't want to recognize Anglo Africans. You know, why all these Anglos around here? All these English cultured, English speaking people. Okay, I speak English. Okay, I don't know if we ever spoke anything more than that. I know that my family spoke a little, maybe Creole or French or something like that. But even in this book that we're reading, we see when some people, you know, rather than going to certain places, um, you know, that other folks went to. Some people went into exile in France, which was another way to piggyback and springboard into the Americas. I mean, this information is so fucking convoluted, okay? Um, you know, it's so fucking convoluted. But like I said, you have the oath of supremacy. You see that in some of the last chapters that the Irish history parallels American history. It falls right in the same time frame. It's almost like one hand washes the other. Okay. Um, in some, at sometimes I feel like this is the reason why you got all this melee of information coming out, the gearing towards Carrie Mayo and Savage. And I'll just go ahead and throw it out there. um, you know the folks that got their feelings hurt about the bots that was in Smoke Signals channel, and then the reemergence of uh, Chief Holiday and all of that shit. I think that those people are kind of pushing back on this information because you never want this information to really come all the way out. But what I will say in relationship to that is shout out to the Moors, because had it not been for the Moors, we wouldn't have been looking at world history. You know, my ass would have sitting over there with the rest of y'all going, we Pan African, we not Pan African, we Aboriginal, we not Aboriginal, we Indian, we not Indian. Shout out to the Moors for saying, go look at world history. Okay, that world history is our history. Okay, but I'm gonna get this reading. I'm gonna start this reading. It's been a minute, so I'm trying to, remember in my head where the last chapters put us off at. But if you don't, know, remember, like I vaguely remember, then go look to the last stream and see where we were in the last chapter, and also know that I'm closing these chapters up, these live streams up shortly after I do them. So shortly I will be closing up the last stream, um, and leaving this one up for a while so that people can hear it. And also, hopefully some of you have went and got the book. I know that there was one person that said they had ordered the book and it was coming. I hope they haven't passed me up as far as the reading is concerned. But we're almost through with this reading, and then we'll see what else pops off if I can just hold on to um, not being disheartened by the state of affairs of the black power politics of social media. Okay. But we are in this book, we are on page 227. The book that in question is A History of Ireland by Peter and Fiona Somerset Fry. I find it to be a really good book because what they said, they went back 6,000. They started at 6,000 BC. They covered, in at least the first and second chapters, if you would, they covered the Neolithic, Bronze, and Iron Ages, describing Irish tombs, artifacts, and buildings. Then there was the arrival of Christianity in Ireland. Okay, and I remember something vaguely about the Irish saying that they didn't want to go over to that island at one particular point, but they eventually went over there or something to that point. They go through the Golden Age, which is 500 to 800 AD, when Irish scholars were the most renowned in Europe. Peace, Jim. Peace. Um, then it goes into the Great Viking period, the takeover of Ireland by Henry II in 1171, long and painful association with Ireland. It goes into the Catholic struggle between the Protestant and Catholic, colonial settlement, and native Irishmen. Mind you, in one of these chapters we just read, we found out about the Orange Men, and it's ironic that y'all call Donald Trump orange. I think they did mention something very briefly in here about Austrian. Um, but you had the Oakmen, the Oak Boys, the Steel Boys, um, and I think it's one more. And I was remarking in one of the last posts how those particular groups who were doing those particular things look just like the KKK and the Proud Boys. I'm just saying that what we think is long gone dead and a bygone day is actually still here, alive and well today. You know, one of the problems that we have, and one of the problems that social media influencers are really going to have to deal with, is when them white boys start getting in y'all ass. Okay. Because y'all really can't handle them, because you don't know enough about their history other than they were Neanderthals and they lived in caves and they came in and stuff. Yeah, y'all fucking up with that shit. Okay. Because you need to hit them with knowledge and not opinion and feeling. Okay. Yeah, we doing okay, Jim. Just seeing your comment there. We doing okay. It's a struggle over here. You know, we got some family issues going on. We're expecting a new grandchild and hoping everything turns out well with that. Um, you know, I'm home for a minute trying to decide if I want to go back out or if I want to try to stay in until my daughter has um, until she goes into labor and everything. It's a little challenging around here right now. Okay. But anyway, what else did it go into? It also went into the struggle between Protestant and Catholic, colonial settlement, and native Irishmen, the flight for independence. That's right where we are, because we're looking at like the 1776 period. We're right in that area. I think in the last chapter we were right in that area that would lead up to independence, the Declaration of Independence. Now we have the American Declaration of Independence, but then we also see paralleling that is the Irish talking about independence in relationship to what they were dealing with the Catholics, if you would. And that's a hodgepodge of some bullshit. Okay. Well, not bullshit, but it's a hodgepodge of different little nuances that are in there. Okay. It also says here on the front flap, um, it says, and the fight for independence achieved by the South in 1921. So apparently in this next chapter that we go into, because we just came out of the part where they were talking about union, okay? The chapter title, chapter number 9 was the union. And so we're looking at that Northern Union versus the Southern Confederate. You know, all that stuff falls right in line with this. So now we're going into the Great Famine, okay? And of course, you know, we saw some of the sickness and disease that happened earlier in relationship to this, and how people had to pull out and try to rescue the Irish from what they were going through at the time. Um, from their landlords, for people trying to control that area to have their money. One of the things that we talked about, and I'm just remembering some things here. One of the things that we talked about previously was what happened on page, I think 180 or 186. I think it's 180, where they were talking about where the Irish had finally gotten a surplus as far as creating something, and that might have been 2 chapters back. Where they had created a surplus and they were able to kind of try to demand what they needed. Okay. Um, because they had become producers, and they were talking about the wool industry, or the wool, how they had put sanctions against the Irish for exporting wool, importing wool in different areas, particularly England, and then how they created a surplus in line with that, which gave them some standing in the government halls of Parliament, not just the Irish Parliament, but the English Parliament as well. One of the things that came out when it didn't come out, that was associated as well with the wool industry, was when they brought in hemp. Now, we know, if you remember, that hemp was used for sales. It was used for a lot of different things in the past. But like with us today, we talk more along the lines of cannabis. Okay. We concentrate on cannabis because, that sanction came down where cannabis was considered a narcotic, and our folks was getting locked up for having weed. And now weed is legal in a lot of places, and we're not heading that industry, and a lot of our folks are still in jail for weed charges. But in that, there was the whole hemp thing as far as ropes and stuff like that was concerned. I remember when that came out many years ago, and because I'm not, I've only been on one cruise ship, and it didn't have any sales. Okay. I never studied that kind of stuff, but they were talking about how the ropes on the ships were made out of hemp, and then to look at how, where we had all this seafaring shit in times past, we don't necessarily have that today in the same aspect. And I think that had a lot to do with them um, making hemp production illegal in the past. But hemp production, using hemp for clothes or this, that, or the other, whatever they used it for, um, we tend not to look at that because we're looking at other things. And even with the wool, we don't even really look at the um, wool production, because of course we've come into this area of black versus white, and they duped us with this, look at everybody according to their skin color and stuff like that, and so you demonize all these people because they don't look like you. um all this mixed and mingled Kool-Aid shit. Hey, Olmec. Okay. But yeah, you had the wool industry where they made sanctions, and then you had the hemp industry that actually popped off at some particular time in that same time frame. um those two things go hand in hand. But again, we tend to look at this like this is the history of Ireland. So we have a tendency to look at this like this is only over there, and fuck those people over there. But what I'm trying to show from reading this book for the first time and seeing what they displayed, what they presented here, is that Irish history and this American history go hand in hand. They go parallel to each other. Just like recently in one of the lives, and I'll get to the reading in a minute, but just like in one of the lives, they were talking about, I think they were talking about Spain and England along those lines, and the War of 1812. Well, while they were doing that on the panel, I did what I did in the chat and started to bring in the Sweden, because Sweden had lost control of Finland in 1809. And I think that leads right into um, the War of 1812. And for people, many of us who have this, we were the Southeast woodland Indians and all of this stuff. We have a tendency not to look at what was going on in the North. Okay. Um, and what I see from being a traveler on the road, you go up on I-80 and you're going to see a whole lot of Dutch windmills, and you're going to see a whole lot of Swedish shit. But we don't look at that because we have been um, programmed to look at life and history and world affairs along a certain line, until people start remembering names like Mitch McConnell and other folks like that. And it's like, um, I get it, but there was this statement that they made many years ago, and they talked about how our folks will look at the whole lay of the land, okay? But the other folks would objectify something, okay? So, it makes it hard for us to say, hey, it's discrimination against black folks because they only look at one particular case or two particular cases, and that allows them to move forward in what they do and us to be sitting here going, like, how do we win this shit on discrimination and colorism and all this other stuff? So when we start to section this off, to talk about one particular person, one entertainer, one legislator, one president, one prime minister, one secretary of defense in one area, we are going into that area of, excuse me for saying it, the white man's objectification, so that we won't look at the whole lay of the land. And this is the problem that I see that we have in our community, that we're not well versed in world affairs collectively. Even when y'all talk about, in times past, I think it was the movie 300 that dealt with Sparta. When they talked about the Persians coming in, and how the Persians would be, Xerxes and them would be dealing with Sparta, they were talking about how, um, if y'all go back and watch the movie, and if I got the movie correct, they're coming along a mountain, this little narrow walkway, and it's maybe like 6 to 10 of them, in each line. And they talked about how, when they, in their culture, as far as that was concerned, that in war, when that first line of defense got attacked, the 5 or 6 in the next line behind them would fill in that gap. And that was one of the ways that they were able to fight and defeat people, because they just kept filling in, um, the gap of the fallen. It's like when we talk about the Moors, that we were supposed to be at one point, that we were supposed to have the knowledge, so much so and so standardized, not regurgitated, not mimicked, not indoctrinated, but the knowledge so standardized within us, that when one person fell, like Taj or Taharka or, um, Cosmo L, or any of these people, that other people would be so knowledgeable that they could step in, to that role. And we failed at that. Regardless of what people say, we failed at that. And that's why we're so splintered in this community, because we've never honed in the ranks. What we've done is tried to cull the masses. And that's a problem, because that leads to the indoctrination that we have, but not being well versed in all, an eclectic, or that might be the wrong word, but an overall and wholesome way of looking at world history and world affairs. Because, just like in the chat, when they were talking about the slaves and the Slavs, and they're looking at one particular place. They're looking at the Slavs of Europe, which the Irish could be considered that, the Slavs of Europe, but they're not looking at the Slavi people in northwestern Canada and America. They're not looking at, that area, those people coming in, that while you're looking over here and saying it's the people that came from the east and came from across the pond in the Atlantic, you're not looking at the ones that were right here at your own back door. That's called the same thing. You dismiss that. And that's part of our problem. We're not looking at it holistically. We're just trying to cull the masses. We're trying to have personality worship. I got this information and I've been around for this long and this, that, and the other. For me, Miss Navi, I don't give a shit. If I stumble across stuff, which is what I do, if I stumble across stuff and it's something that you can use that shit. Take what you need and use it for your own understanding. But this shit about we in this group and that group is against this group. I'm tired of pickup games. I don't know if y'all tired of pickup games. I'm tired of fucking debates and shit that don't lead anywhere. It just, ruffles our feathers and, tickles our fancy for a minute, but it doesn't do anything, because we're not actually looking at it to solve a problem. We're just doing it to keep shit going. Okay. Um, So, in light of that, let's start our reading from chapter 10. It's called The Great Famine because that's what we're into right now. Ooh, my voice is killing me, y'all. Okay. Yep. All right, let's get some reading done. This chapter is not as long as chapter 11 is, and it's shorter than the other chapters that we did. So I'm thinking, what I was thinking was I was going to do 10 and 11 because this one starts at page 227, the Great Famine, and it ends at 238. So we're going to do chapter 10 and chapter 11. And chapter 11 is very long, okay? It's longer, and it's the struggle for home rule. Remember, this goes parallel with our history. All right. So let's start here on page 227. The movement for repeal of the Union was dealt a shattering blow in the mid 1840s when Ireland was devastated by the Great Famine. This was a succession of 4 years' failure of the potato crop. The famine ravaged Ireland from 1845 to 1848. That is a minuscule part of the 8,000 or so years of Ireland's history, which are treated in this book. Now think about it. They say the Bible was 6,000 years ago, but they telling you Ireland was 8,000 years ago. But yeah, these religious motherfuckers. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm trying to hone in my shit right now. Okay. But 8,000 years history that's in this book, treated in this book. Yet it was probably the most cataclysmic event in that long period, and its effects are still with the Irish in Ireland and with the people of Irish descent in many parts of the world, particularly in the United States. Some of the changes it wrought in the economy, in society, and in politics were immediate. Some took longer to emerge, some are still emerging. And true to the tendency of the Irish to decorate and on occasion to obscure their history with myths and legends, the famine and its aftermath are cloaked in their own peculiar brand of mythology. Yet many of the facts are inescapable, for they are documented in reports and statistical material, while the full horror of the famine itself, as it was experienced in every corner of the island, is more than amply testified in contemporary reports and interviews, and most distressingly of all, in the horrendous decline in population through death and immigration in that 4 years. A key part of the mythology sustained to this day is the damning indictment of the British government's role. Remember, I was saying earlier that I started dropping the British flag and they slid over to caramel and savage the beefs with, okay? I think this is what they don't want coming out, okay? Yes, to a certain extent. But to read it again, a key part of the mythology sustained in this day is the damning indictment of the British government's role, that it created a potato famine and then watched the Irish die. Have y'all ever heard when they said that the potato famine, this potato famine that they're talking about in the 1840s, 1845 to 1848, as the book has said, it was directly related to America? Now, how does that work when we say that this is America and Britain is over there? Oh, it's kind of tying them two things together, ain't it? Okay, you know. So they're saying it's related to Britain, the British government. A lot is related to the British government. I should put a flag in the damn chat again. To continue. No one seriously disputes the gravity of the impact of the famine upon Ireland in general or upon the potato dependent millions in particular. It cannot have been entirely unexpected. Let me say that again. It cannot have been entirely unexpected, and much could and should have been done to avert its worst effects. The potato had been the staple diet of a continuously growing proportion of the Irish people for well over a century, and by the 1840s, it had become the sole diet of 3 million out of the total population of about 8 million. The diet, particularly when it was combined with buttermilk, was highly nutritional, and in the view of some authorities, it made a contribution to Ireland's relatively low infant mortality rate in the 18th and earlier 19th century, which in turn was a key factor in Ireland's rapid population rise between the 1760s and the 1840s. I'm going to read this again. Okay, I'm going to read this again. Hey, Savage, let me read that again. Okay, because here we'll say, hey, America had corn and the three sisters, and y'all ignore the potato. Okay, I love me some potatoes, shit, but I don't call them chips. Never mind. Okay, my bad. I'm talking shit. Let me read that again. It cannot be entirely unexpected, and much could and should have been done to avert its worst effects. The potato had been a staple diet of a continuously growing proportion of the Irish people for well over a century, and by the 1840s, it had become the sole diet for 3 million out of a total population of about 8 million. Did y'all ever read or watch the Book of Negroes when in one of the scenes they were up there and they accused somebody of stealing potatoes? That ain't Ireland. That was Nova Scotia. Okay. Anyway, maybe we should look at how potatoes start popping up all over the place and not just corn, squash and beans. Okay. Anyway, let's continue. Rereading. The diet, particularly when it was combined with buttermilk, was highly nutritional, and in the view of some authorities, it made a contribution to Ireland's relatively low infant mortality rate in the 18th and early 19th century, which in turn was a key factor in Ireland's rapid population rise between the 1760s, which is before independence, and the 1840s, which is before the Civil War. Now, what it has down here, and I'm not sure if this is, yeah, this will be millions. So here in parentheses, it has the year and then it has the population. Okay, that's what it looks like. So it says 1767 equals 2.5 million. 1781 equals C. I don't know what the C stands for. 4 million. 1800 it equals 5 million. 1821 between the War of 1812 and between the Indian Removal Act, we're talking 6.75 million or 6.75 million people. And then in 1841, it goes to 8.25 million or 8.14. I'm sorry, 8.25. Yeah, 8.25 million. So this is talking about the rise in population just from having the potatoes. Okay. And I know a lot of us will be like, fuck them white folks. Excuse my language. We'll say that, fuck them white folks. But at the same time, some of us have such a good heart that we would have helped people. But a lot of people want us not to remember that part of our humanity here in America. They want us to discount that. And this is part of our problem for what's going on in our society. But I'll leave that alone. We can talk about that at a later time. Let's continue. We are on page just 228. A potato crop grown on 1 acre of land was enough to feed a family of 5 or 6 for the best part of a year. It was easy to plant and easy to harvest, unlike corn. Okay, you know what they said about corn? That corn, it was hard on the land and you could do it for so many years, and then you have to let the land rest, and then there's that jubilee year and all that bullshit. Okay, but here they're talking about a whole different crop, and we talk about we were an agrarian society, or should I say an agricultural society, and we fed the world, but yet we ignore this. We ignore the fact that we helped other people. Okay, we ignore the fact that when you ain't got all the shit that you need, rice and beans and sugar and flour and all of this, when you down to that level of your staple goods, that you got some potatoes floating around in here, okay? Make sure you feed your family. We're gonna ignore all of that stuff because of some colorism shit. Because we don't like them because they're pale skin, white skin, light bright, and almost white, and all this other shit. And this is a problem, okay? But the future is to the youth, and y'all deserve everything y'all get. Let me continue. Like I said, I didn't want to come up because I knew I had some stuff in my craw about what I was seeing. But let's read. A potato crop grown on 1 acre of land was enough to feed a family of 5 or 6 for the best part of a year. It was easy to plant and easy to harvest. All you needed was a spade. But there were disadvantages. The potato could not be stored for long, and a crop might not stretch over a whole period from one harvest to the next. From June to August every year, many potato dependents were short and had to find other foods such as meal or go out and beg. Okay. Dependence on potatoes discouraged the small farmer and the cotier, Cottier, from cultivating alternative food for their own sustenance. Let me read that again. Dependence on potatoes discouraged the small farmer and the cotier from cultivating alternative food for their own substance or as a hedge against a possible failure of a crop. And there were many failures in one region or another in the century between the 1740s and the 1840s, particularly in the last years. But until 1845, there was never a national failure. If a small farmer did grow cereals, it was usually to pay rent for the land he worked, like sharecropping, or as on some small farms, to sell them for cash. In some parts of the West, many small farmers had actually forgotten how to grind corn into flour. Blasphemy. Okay, what y'all saying in the chat? Okay, gotcha. They have forgotten how to grind corn into flour, and some even have forgotten how to plow or to sow. Now, I'm just going to go out on a limb here when people say, you reap what you sow because the Bible says so. Well, how come they didn't tell you that some people forgot how to fucking sow? Uh-oh. Never mind. Rural poverty in Ireland was the biggest social problem in the land, blighted by other deep-seated difficulties and injustices, and it was part and parcel. Y'all heard that word before in the Moorish realms. Part and parcel. We're part and parcel of this said government. Okay, never mind. Um, and it was part and parcel of the rapid population rise. It was also, in large measure, the result of grossly irresponsible attitudes of landowners who insisted on extracting as much rent from their lands as they could, which they spent recklessly outside of Ireland instead of investing it at home. It's the same thing that's happening today. Okay, this homeless population burst and people can't afford where they live at, to live where they're living and all that. Same shit happening here. Okay, remember this runs parallel with us. As the laws operated, if a tenant farmer wanted to improve his holding and its yields, he would generally have to cough up the bulk of the better profits in increased rents to his landlord. This did not encourage him to be responsible, and many tenant farmers turned to subdividing and further subdividing the land so that they, in turn, could earn rents from the increasing number of people wanting small or smaller plots of land as potato gardens. Okay. There was never enough land for all. Even when courtiers and laborers moved on to the mountainsides to grow potatoes in hitherto rough and uncultivated lands. Y'all had to excuse me, I'm having some trouble right here with my tongue in my mouth and all that stuff. So here's the little struggle here. It says subdivision spread. Fathers broke up small plots into smaller ones for their increasingly more numerous sons, and the advantage of holding became smaller and smaller. By the 1840s, less than 7% of holdings in Ireland were of 30 or more acres. In Connaught, 64% was less than 5 acres. A few landowners were seriously worried about the dependence on the potato and the fragmentation of estates, and even tried to educate courtiers and laborers in new farming methods and in growing alternative crops for food. Agricultural societies were formed for this purpose, and it says to see page 76. But they achieved little. Let's go back to 176 and see what they're talking about real quick. Looks like they're talking about that area where they say, let me see. Um, Then, quoting in the middle, second paragraph, then between 1727 and 1730, Ireland endured 3 years of famine. The bodies of people who had starved to death laid unburied outside their hovels, and Swift wrote the most grotesquely ironic of all his tracts and this is the name of the track, a modest proposal for preventing the children of poor people in Ireland from being a burden on their parents or the country. That's the title. He ingeniously advised that one fourth part of the infants under 2 years old be forthwith fattened as dainty bits for landlords. In other words, feed your children to the landlords. Okay, you ain't got nothing else. So that's what I think they're referring to there, that famine that was going on here. Let's go back to our page 228 or 229. 229. Uh, Page 75. It says agricultural societies were formed for this purpose, but they achieved little. The situation was highly perilous. The potato crop might fail at any time, leading to widespread distress, as it was in the early years following the end of the war against France in 1815. A slump in agricultural prices, coupled with the continued rise in population and a virtual collapse of Irish industry, except in Ulster, produced gigantic unemployment and rapid poverty. Even Dublin appeared a half dead city. Begging was common. Travelers to Ireland often commented upon clusters of uh, mendicants crowding round their coaches. Mendicants, um, mendicants, mendicants, crowding around their coaches. Some of the travelers had much harsher comments. De Beaumont from France thought the Irish were poor. I'm sorry. De Beaumont from France thought the Irish poor were in worse misery than the Negro in his chains, and Cole, like the department store Cole from Germany, believed no kind of life anywhere else in Europe could be considered pitiable after a visit to Ireland. The Duke of Wellington, an Anglo-Irish landlord, in addition to his other roles, said there was a country in which poverty existed to the extent. I'm sorry. He said there was never a country in which poverty existed to the extent it existed in Ireland, and he has spent many years abroad in many of the world's poorest parts, including Portugal, Spain, and the Indian subcontinent. The Devon Commission, or Devon Commission, depending how you say that, the Devon Commission, named after its chairman, the Earl of Devon, set up in 1843 to investigate the Irish land system, sent its members to visit all ports of Ireland in 1843 and 1844. And in its report, it admitted that, quote, it would be it would be impossible adequately to describe the privations which they, as that is, the Irish laborer and his family, habitually and silently endure. In many districts, their own food is the potato, their only beverage, water, their cabins are seldom a protection against the weather. A bed or a blanket is a rare luxury, and nearly in all their pig and manure constitute their only property. And nearly in all their pig and manure constitute their only property, end quote. It would not be right to omit the fact that in all their misery, the Irish demonstrated time and again to visitors, commissioners, journalists, and so forth, a seemingly inexhaustible reserve of gaiety and lightheartedness that were duly noted, but it must be wondered too how much of this was a cover. Mm. And they called us, they said us black folks, us niggas was, we just happy niggas jumping around and tap dancing and playing the banjo and shit. Is the nigga the Irish? I just want to know. I just want to know. Is the nigga the Irish? What you got up in here? Thank you, Omek. Thank you. I appreciate it. You said, remember, hey, Kilcock, you said, remember, this is Irish Catholics. It very well could be Jews, blacks, and Muslims. Oh, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep, that part too. Okay. All right, let me continue reading. Where are we at? Where am I? Right, North America. Okay, I see North America in here. All right, I just lost my spot. I moved around. So, okay, it could be a cover. Okay. Distress could be partially, though never totally, relieved on a regional basis by a number of expedients such as grants, relief, relief from landowners themselves. Wait a minute. Wait. Am I reading this right? Distress could be partially, though never totally, relieved on a regional basis by a number of expedients such as grants, relief from landowners themselves, generally available only after hard pressure from the authorities who were at the same time reluctant to interfere with landowners' universally recognized inalienable rights of property, comma, encouragement to emigrate with an E, public works programs, comma, charity, and in the last period before the Great Famine, and of course during it, the workhouse. But a national failure was quite a different matter. And when in the autumn of 1845 the potato crop failed in about half of Ireland, the disaster caught the country unprepared. Did y'all catch those titles, those names, those divisions? What'd you say? Please remember, Ireland is part of the British Empire. Yeah, subjugated under them. But let's say those names again. It said a number of expedients, such as grants. Remember when they had the land grants here? Relief from landowners themselves. Y'all can figure out where that might show up at. But it said those relief from landowners themselves. It says generally available only after hard pressure from the authorities, who were at the same time reluctant to interfere with landowners' universally recognized, here it is, inalienable rights of property. Okay. And in the same page, they're going to talk about North America. So, does that have something to do with the inalienable rights that we say we have under the Constitution? Never mind. Y'all figure it out on your own. Um, the other one, it says encouragement to immigrate, which is what's going to happen. Public works programs. Okay. Yeah, that comes in there. Charity, and in the last period before the Great Famine, and of course during it, the workhouse. We might call that a sweatshop today. Anyway, or slavery. Okay, because we don't have a poorhouse over here, but they did over there. Let's continue. It says, but a national failure was quite a different matter, and when it in the autumn of 1845 the potato crop failed in about half of Ireland, the disaster caught the country unprepared. The summer of 1845 was particularly wet in July, but a good potato crop was nonetheless expected. One paper, the Freeman's Journal, actually stated that the potato crop was never before so large and at the same time so abundant. That was towards the end of July. At about the same time, however, disturbing news from the south of England reached the government in London. Potatoes crops, especially in the Isle of Wight, were being decimated by a blight of unusual character, which appeared to have come in from Western Europe, where crops in several countries were also being destroyed. I don't know if I've actually heard something about this. Um, where it was sabotaged. I think I heard something about it being sabotaged. What you say, Killer Croc? The British refused to send ships of grain or wheat to feed the starving indigenous Irish poor. 1 million starved and 15 million immigrated. Thank you for that information. A genocide in our terms, or a pogrom. Because when you add the Oak Boys, Steel Boys, and the other ones, I don't know if it was the People Boys, Peep of Boys, or whatever the case is. I think that leads into the pogroms as well. No different than things that happen over here, destroying crops and stuff over here. You said history repeats itself. This is true Europe at this point. This is true Europe at this point experienced. I think you said famine. I can't see behind the dollar sign on my screen. But anyway, let me continue reading. Okay, this is gonna be one of them reads. I think I got like Humbling said, I think I got 5 hours on my free shit. Okay, so let's try to get it in. The Isle of Wight being the blight character appeared to okay, Western Europe were also being destroyed. The blight had arrived there from North America, where in 1842 it had got into the potato crops along the Atlantic coast and ruined them. We know now that the blight was a fungus hitherto not identified. Um, Phytophthora infestans. Phytophthora. I'm going to put this in the chat for you guys. Okay. Phyop. Where do we go? Ophthora. And this is, I'm kind of putting this in. Let me see if I spelled that right. Phyoph. Thora. Okay, right here. Sorry, I'm messing that up. Thora infestants. I think this is where it comes in to say the potato famine was a direct relationship to America. I think that's where they're bringing this in. So some kind of infestation. Okay. It says scientists of the time thought the disease hitting the potato was in the tuber itself. By September 1845, the fungus had reached the Wexford, Rexford, and it spread rapidly. So I think right here, some people might want to go look and see who was in Wexford at in 1845 to see what was going on, who possibly could have been responsible for that if it was something that was planned, okay, and not accidental or natural. But anyway, it says it spread rapidly, though some of the crop had already been lifted and was free from it. Among the grimmest features of the blight was the manner in which it did its work. A crop was dug out of the ground, seemingly wholesome. Within a day or two, however, the tubers turned into a foul smelling, putrefying mess. This happened without warning in big fields and small gardens alike, in barns, shops, kitchens of houses, great and small. In front of his eyes, a laborer's or a cotier's entire stock of food was for the coming year was disintegrated. Despite some of the crop having been lifted, starvation and consequent disease affected almost every part of the country, even though the crop failure itself was confined to little over half of Ireland. Starving laborers and courtiers and their families fled from their neighborhoods in search for food, but thousands were sick with contagious illnesses and spread the germs to hitherto unaffected districts, particularly the towns. Much, and worse was to follow. The crop of 1846 failed completely. The 1847 crop was blighted widely, though not as completely as 1846. Yet the effects were perhaps worse because thousands of people had eaten their seed potatoes free of blight, and only a fraction of the necessary planting had been done. And in 1848, for the fourth successive year, the crop failure, this time completely, or the crop failed, this time completely. As if that were not enough, the winter of 1846-1847 was the longest and coldest in living memory. The misery for millions of potato dependent people and for others was compounded by a number of factors that even singly would have been overwhelming. Government attitudes to the provision of relief, the spread of typhus, relapsing fever, bacillic dysentery, and famine dropsy, evictions from land and from mean one-room hovels by heartless landlords, the sight of cartloads of grain and other crops being taken along the roads to ports for shipment to England and other parts while they starved. The full horror of those years was poignantly described with a welter of incontrovertible evidence in William and Edwards, The Great Famine, and Cecil Woodham Smith's The Great Hunger. Perhaps we can illustrate a minuscule fraction of the horror in which short account fraction of horror in one short account by a magistrate from Cork visiting Skipburn in December of 1846. And the quote is thus: what you say, Killer Croc? It is called Gortamore, the Great Hunger, hence why you get Irish over the world. They ebim they ebim reached the pinnacle of Western society when JFK became president and the first Irish Catholic. Uh-huh. I got you. Okay. Yeah, I always thought about JFK and that because they didn't like the fact that he was Irish and Catholic and all that shit. But let's continue. Yeah, people don't like their paybacks. Let's do this quote here from the magistrate from court in Skibbereen in December 1846, and it says, quote, I entered some of the hovels, and the scenes that presented themselves were such as no tongue or pen can convey the slightest idea of. In the first, six famished and ghastly skeletons, to all appeared dead, were huddled in a corner in some filthy straw, their sole covering what seemed a ragged horsecloth, and their ratchet legs hanging out, naked above the knees. I approached in horror and found by a low moaning they were alive. They were in fever, four children, a woman, and what had once been a man. End quote. In 1849, when the worst of the famine was over, one more murderous blow was struck against Ireland, an epidemic of cholera that hit many of the largest towns, including Dublin and Belfast. By 1850, the population of Ireland, which in 1845 had stood at about 8.5 million, had been reduced to 6.25 million, that is, slashed by one quarter. 1 million people had died from starvation and disease. Another million had fled from their native lands on overcrowded ships to seek refuge in Britain, Europe, and North America, chiefly the last. The great bulk of this 2 million people were part of the gigantic unemployment problem that was solved by the famine, as one of the British officials of the time, Charles Trevelyan, um, permanent secretary to the Treasury, so succinctly put it. In his view, the famine reflected the wishes of the all wise Providence. And Trevor Lane, I'm going to spell his name in case y'all want to go look him up. It's Trevelyan. Okay. Charles Trevelyan. Um, or Traveline, however you want to pronounce that. It says, what did the government in Britain do to help revive or relieve the stress created by the famine? The famine struck Ireland at a time when Britain was racked by political argument over the corn laws. These had been introduced during the long war with France to put heavy duties on corn imported into England, to keep foreign corn out, and to maintain high prices for homegrown corn. But they caused tremendous suffering among the poorest classes in Britain, who had to pay artificially high prices for bread and other foods. They also damaged trading generally. Agitation to repeal the laws began to gather momentum in the 1830s, but it was resisted stubbornly by the government and by the landlord classes. The potato blight of 1845 and the hardship it created in Ireland convinced the Prime Minister, Sir Robert Peel, that the corn laws must be repealed so that grain could be released at prices which the Irish peasantry could afford. Peel's earlier career in Ireland and his attitudes, fortunately, did not affect his essential humanity, and in many of the moves necessary to get the laws repealed, he risked and was willing to risk his position at the head of the administration. He stands out as one of the very few Englishmen who showed something other than callous indifference to the plight of the victims of the famine. When the first reports of the famine reached the government in London, Peel responded fast. While initiating the moves for repeal, he ordered the purchase of £100,000 worth of Indian corn and meal on the United States market to hand out to the starving Irish, doing so without first consulting his colleagues. The corn began to be distributed in the new year of 1846. Peel also initiated public works programs where the poor could earn money. And in the first season, some 150,000 people obtained jobs. It has been said that his measures helped to the extent that no one died in the first season as a result of the famine, although thousands endured the extreme hardship and deprivation. It is certainly pleasing to be able to record in uh, to be to record that in his lifetime, Peel received the credit for his promptness and energy. There is some irony in that in the summer of 1846, before the second visitation of the fungus, he was defeated in Parliament and resigned office. And resigned office as a result of the repeal. Hold on, I don't know if it's this fan that's doing this. Give me a second, you guys. This is interesting. I never read this part. What you got in the chat? You said this will soon lead to the Irish Republican Brotherhood in America. Okay. Literally millions of dollars were sent back home to feed families in Ireland, like they do now. Okay. Okay. All right. Got you. Give me a second. I don't know if it's that fan that's causing me problems reading. I'm struggling with these words, man. All right. Let me see if I can get back. There is some irony in that there's some irony in that in the summer of 1846, before the second visitation of the fungus, he was defeated in Parliament and resigned office as a result of the appeal, and that his administration was followed by a Whig government under Lord John Russell, which took a quite different course when in the autumn of the second failure struck the Irish potato crop. Among where's my headset? Up there. Okay. Among the principal men of the government involved in the new administration's program was Charles Wood, Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he had as permanent secretary to the Treasury the civil servant Charles Trevelyan, who we have noted acknowledged the intervention of Providence in the solution of the Irish high population problem from the previous page. Now, I'm going to take a quick little break and say here, um, jumping in on what one of the people in the chat said about, it could have been black and Muslim and Jew. And so right here, even here, we might not see it, but it could be. I'm just making a speculation that when this person is saying, hey, it's God's providence, other people are like, fuck you, we don't care about you. Some people saying, hey, let's help them out, the starving person, the good Samaritan type shit. And then this person here pops up and says, well, this is God's divine intervention and providence and all of this. And that reminds me of when they talk about how Jews, whatever they look like, how they will say basically, if they put you in a room that there's no air in and you suffocate because there's no air in the room, that you got to blame the room as opposed to them. They get off scot-free, even though they're the ones that put you in that position. That's what that reminded me of right there. Okay, that it could be some of these undercover brothers. Okay, you know, and I say brothers because it goes men and women, but I'm just saying, brothers was in charge in relationship to this. Okay, so they're gonna blame it. It's God's providence that they're dying, and you motherfuckers. Okay, but anyway, let's continue. Um, it says both were devotees of the concept of dissociating the government from helping the Irish in their tribulations, and determined that Ireland herself should stand the cost of bringing succor to her less fortunate millions in the famine crisis. Between them, these two did more than any others to create the miseries that followed the change of administration at Westminster after Peel was defeated. Whether this is a series of deliberate acts which today we might classify as genocidal, or whether more simply they were the manifestation of breathtaking meanness and callousness from officials too rigidly tied to the prevailing ideas of laissez-faire economics, must still be open to debate. Certainly, Trevelyan said and wrote time and time again that the Irish were exaggerating their miseries, that they must do more for themselves, and he intervened frequently to nullify on the spot remedies being applied by sympathetic officials in Ireland and constantly complained about expenditures and alleged extravagances or extravagance. Thank you, Killer. Okay. Very briefly, the Whig policy applied in 1846 and again in 1847 was that there should be no buying of food for the Irish starving by the government. This was to be provided by private enterprise, which of course meant that it would be sold to those who could raise the money. Government aid was to be strictly limited to generating public works to provide employment, but even this was to be largely funded by property owners in the areas of distress. But these works did not, could not relieve distress because they were only enough jobs for about 1/10 of the number of people looking for them. And when the government finally saw that the schemes would not work, it took a year or more to make meaningful adjustments. By that time, several hundred thousand poverty stricken people had succumbed to the fever or disease and died or joined the immigration queues. Excuse me, that were fast becoming a new future or a new feature of Irish reaction to the famine. The government tried other schemes, such as a network of soup kitchens. They did afford relief of a temporary nature to over 2 million people. Then the government decided to transfer the whole problem of Ireland's poor to the Irish landlords through special poor law legislation, which served only to encourage the landlords to evict as many poor tenants as they could. The government also expanded the workhouse scheme, though not at the same time the size or number of the workhouse buildings, so that by 1848, nearly a million people were in the workhouses. Nearly a million people were in workhouses that normally were capable of accommodating a total of 250,000. So they're saying nearly a million people were in the workhouses that could only accommodate 250,000. Okay. All these and other schemes took place and were administered by, for the most part, honorable but bureaucratic people who stuck rigidly to the rule book, and so numerous victims suffered far more than they need have done because of delays, inefficiencies, mistakes, and injustices. What probably caused most resentment and despair than anything was the sight of cartloads of grain and other food products being shipped over to England or elsewhere from healthy Irish fields, while Irishmen, Irish women, and Irish children starved and slid into slow and premature death because the potato had failed. In telling the story of the Great Famine, however, um, I'm sorry, in telling the story of the Great Famine, however, briefly, we should not overlook the splendid voluntary relief work done by the generous organizations and individuals, the latter sadly all too rare among the rich landowner class in Ireland. Among these were the Society of Friends. Oh, suki suki na. Okay. Um, Among these were the Society of Friends, or Quakers, who did so much with their own soup kitchens. The British Relief Association, sponsored by well wishers in Britain who were anxious to put funds where the government would not, and by several agencies in the United States and Canada, in particular, the New York Irish Relief Committee, which alone sent nearly a £250,000. Chief among the individual families who dug deep into their pockets and provided food and work were the Genesis, I'm sorry, Guinness brewing family of Stillorgan Park County, Dublin, and the Earls of Cortown, who set examples to their fellow landlords that were not followed. So these some good guys if you looking at helping people, okay? And I know we got our feelings about the Society of Friends because that's where the a particular group came through in Philadelphia. But anyway, the 1846 failure added another dimension to the famine, a panic to get out of the country altogether. And thousands of courtiers and laborers gathered their families and such possessions as they had, generally no more than the ragged clothes they stood in, and made the journey to harbors and docks to buy and beg passages on ships bound for Britain or Canada and the United States. Greedy and unscrupulous middlemen, and to their shame, some ship captains and owners too took their money and put to sea in old and decrepit ships carrying 2 or 3 or 4 times the number of passengers considered safe for voyaging across the Atlantic, ships in which more than one-fifth of the starving and debilitated immigrants perished before they even saw the New World. Now, did the sharks follow them too? I'm just saying. Um, where is it? Oh, New World. Okay. Coffin ships, they were amply called. Nearly 1 million people immigrated or emigrated to Britain and North America between 1846 and 1849. What did the famine leave in its wake? Paradoxically, it led to considerable improvements in agricultural economy, which had started to emerge even when the potato failures were at their peak. The great majority of the victims had been potato dependents in the rural areas. Their disappearance in such appalling numbers drastically reduced the numbers of small holdings and led to a sharp increase in bigger holdings, largely the kind of small family unit that grew crops, cereals, as well as potatoes, and also pasteurized livestock, with the emphasis shifting from crop growing to livestock farming over the years that immediately followed. Before the famine, less than 20% of all agricultural holdings were more than 15 acres in size. By 1851, the figure had risen to over 50%. The proportion of larger holdings over 30 acres rose from about 7% to over 26% in the same period. The demand for Irish agriculture produced produce was high, and in the 1850s the yields were particularly good, leading one commentator to consider that Ireland's agriculture was one of the most economically advanced in the world. The fundamental problems between landlords and tenants, however, remained unsolved. Politically, the effects of the famine were bad for Ireland. There was the deepest anger and resentment against England and its callous response to the distress. As we have seen, the campaign for repeal of the Union had been dealt a death blow by the potato famine. In his last months, Daniel O'Connell could only think and talk of the terrible times, more awful than we have any notion of. A nation of starving. Ireland is in our hands. If you do not save her, she cannot save herself. A quarter of her population will perish unless you come to her relief. This last extract was in the very last speech he made in the House of Commons a few weeks before he died in 1847. How right he proved. In 1848, before the outbreak of the last of the four fungus attacks, not smallpox blankets, y'all. Okay. In 1848, before the outbreak of the last of the four fungus attacks, fired by the story of revolutions against existing governments in many parts of Europe, the young Irelanders made a desperate and foolhardy bid to emulate their European brothers and declare for an Irish republic. led by Thomas Meagher, Meagher, um, Meagher, and is it Meagher? Led by Thomas Meagher, okay, John Mitchell, son of an Ulster Presbyterian minister, and William Smith O'Brien, a Protestant MP and member of one of the few ancient Irish aristocratic families still owning land in Ireland and claiming direct descent from the great Brian Boru himself, they began to drill in the streets to publish daring, radical articles demanding independence and to hold meetings to declare solidarity with the Chartists of England. Chartists, Chartist, Chartists of England, who were demonstrating at the same time. We probably had to look into who the Chartists were. The authorities arrested the leaders and charged them with sedition. Mitchell was found guilty and sentenced to transportation, while Meagher and O'Brien were acquitted and immediately returned to their activities. But the movement was badly organized and badly supported, not surprisingly, when millions were totally preoccupied with starvation and illness. The ranks of the young Irelanders were infiltrated by government agents, and in July 1848, the revolt collapsed in an inglorious scuffle in a widow's back garden cabbage patch at Ballingarry, Ballingarry, for those who are researching. O'Brien and Meagher and others surrendered, and mercifully were not put to death but transported to join Mitchell in Australia. No sooner had they been dispatched than the last of the four famine crop failures struck. One consequence of the famine was the steady continuation of immigration that had accelerated enormously during the famine years. This more than anything produced this more than anything produced the reduction of Ireland's population down to just over 4 million in the early years of the present century. The bulk of the immigrants, with an E, settled in the United States were extensive colonies of discontented Irish people hating England grew up. Well, let me read that again. The bulk of the immigrants settled in the United States where extensive colonies of discontented Irish people hating England grew up. That hatred continuing in succeeding generations of Americans of Irish descent. Another result was the deep widening of alienation between the northeast region of Ulster, largely Protestant, post-industrialized on the whole post-industrialized on the whole better off economically and less affected by the famine because it had been much less dependent on the potato, and the remainder of Ireland. All right. So that is chapter number 10. I hope you guys were able to understand what I read and what I was reading. Again, I'm reading this for the first time, and y'all can tell I'm having a little bit of struggle with my reading. I want to read chapter 11 because after that, the next chapter will be blood sacrifice. Okay, but as we can see here, we're starting to move. They're admittingly saying that they're starting to move uh, um, into America, as we see America, Britain. I think Britain was one, and then also people being transported to Ireland. Okay, and they're not happy. Okay, because shit is going wrong. I mean, think about it. We sitting up here today talking about can blacks be deported because this, that, and the other. No, unless you want to do some fuck shit. Do some fuck shit. Okay, they might deport you then, but again, it's a lot of hatred that's going on. As they were saying in the last couple paragraph, a hatred that was going on with what these people were subject to, that the government wasn't looking, the government and landowners weren't looking to rescue them from their situation to lend aid or the like. And then they bring them over here, send them over here, if you would, 1840, 1848, 1849. And I don't know if you guys have this in your minds, but when I look at the Civil War that's going to pop off, just 15 years or so in the future, you see them coming off the ships and being given rifles in from the North in movies like the Negro. Book of Negroes or something like that, and being sent to war to be in that war. So here's a war that pops off, and conveniently we find a whole bunch of people that y'all looking to sacrifice any damn way. Okay, if you good enough, I guess, if you good enough to survive the war and be able to take care of yourself and know how to battle and all this other stuff, maybe when the dust settles, you can steal somebody's land because you ain't got no land. Maybe you just hungry and you get a crop or two, get some crops going down there because the South was doing real well. I mean, do y'all see the narrative that I'm looking at? So I think that this next chapter, when it talks about the struggle for home rule, that it's going to slide into these types of things that comes on this shore. I mean, I know that some people want to look at this like, oh, we hate them white folks because they white folks and their skin is pale and they beneath us and they this, that, and the other. But don't y'all have any humanity left in you? Or did y'all just leave your humanity to God and say, let God figure it out, like that other dude that said, it was divine providence and stuff like that. I mean, where we at with this? Okay. Because, my mom taught me a valuable lesson to help people, when I was younger, and I will help a few people, but I ain't at the place I'm helping everybody my damn self because, it's bad. Nobody's coming to save us. You can see here that God wasn't even coming to save them with Trevor Lynn, the way Trevor Lynn was putting this up here. Okay. And we're looking, as one person said in the chat, that history revisiting itself. Okay. Because it's the same thing that's going on now. There's no way that we should be paying extravagant rents like we're paying just to live in a place and you don't own it. When you got to work a job like mine and still have two damn jobs so that you can make ends meet. Okay. You know. But anyway, like I said, don't dupe yourself into thinking that people got solutions for this shit. Okay. All they got is talking points. Okay. Let me look in the chat. My phone is hot as shit. And I'm in the house. Let me see what y'all said. Um, how far up? Okay. It wasn't really hatred. They genuinely thought the Irish were subhuman, same as the slaves in America and the Caribbean were treated. Exactly. Exactly. And we still do that today. A lot of us are saying the same thing, especially some of these, I ain't gonna say their names, some of these folks that like to run out and talk about Cabbage Patch and Neanderthal and cave dwellers and all this stuff. Same shit today. You know. Um, and then the divergent ones, the ones that divert the conversation, is like Yakub created them in a laboratory in the Yucatan. Shut up. Okay, let me stop. You said here that familiar saying, we all know, stop the boat, stop the alien invasion. Wait a minute, see, we seen this shit for centuries. Yeah, human being with a soul and a sense of humanity. It's not too much to ask. Yeah. It's an old saying as well that said basically when you hold a man down, you got to stay down there with them. And some of us don't realize that when we hold other people down, regardless of what the fuck done happened to us over the centuries here in America and all the narratives that have come out about slavery and this, that, and the other, and they're holding us down. When we flip that script, when we put Ned the Wino up on the wall and say that's the new Black Jesus, we doing the same thing. We got to hold them down, and while we're holding them down, we stay down ourselves. In some aspects, we could do so much better if these things in our society uh, were pushed back against. Okay. But all they got to do is starve you out. All they got to do is put your children in jail. All they got to do is target your men or target your women, and we fold like some fucking laundry. Okay. You know, some of the things that we could have did, we didn't do, and some of the things that we should do, we're not going to do today because we're still playing with the same narratives of black versus white, gender wars, religious um, gleanings, leading, and like I said earlier, personality worship. Okay, said the future is yours and you deserve it. Okay. Like my dude said, he said every generation has to deal with this same shit, and we still have not figured out a solution away from this. Because the way that I was looking at it, and I'm gonna read this chapter in a minute. The way that I was looking at it, I said, these brothers and sisters online have been together talking amongst one another for, let's say, a decade, like some people would say, and even longer than that. But yet at the same time, you're still at the same spot. You haven't started anything. You haven't sectioned yourself off to create anything for yourself. And you're still up here trying to sway narratives of who's an Indian, who's an Aboriginal, who's a Moor, who's a Pan African, if we came from Africa, DNA, and all this other fucking bullshit. And it's really sad. And in some aspects, you can't even say shit about a white Irish person because you done kind of fucked up. Okay. Fell for the okey doke and stuff like that. So maybe that's why y'all run from the Irish person. And why this dude up here? And why? And blah, blah, blah. Hey, talk to him for real. Talk to him real. And you might get a real response. But as long as you and your feelings on colorism and victimhood and supremacy and white fragility and all that other shit, y'all can't fix nothing because some of them you might need. And some of them might need you. Um, but I'll leave that alone. Give me a second. I'm getting ready to read this one, Struggle for Home Rule. And this is a long chapter. We're at an hour and 44 minutes right now. Um, but this is going to be a longer chapter. That one was short and it was informative because I never really read about the potato famine. I've heard things about it. But to read somebody's take on it was pretty decent. Now this ain't too long. It's page 239 to page 264. Hopefully my mouth will agree with me and stop acting like it's trying to have a damn seizure around here or some damn shit. And I can read this one. But this is the Struggle for Home Rule, and we're reading The History of Ireland by Peter and Fiona Somerset Fry. Okay. And I make sure that you guys know the authors of this book because there was a whole lot of books that came out under the same title, and I didn't see the other ones addressing this in the manner in which Peter and Fiona Somerset Fry did, as far as going back in 6,000 years and bringing it forward to show certain things. Okay, and it's crazy because while we'll sit up here and say in passing, oh, they ran the snakes out of Ireland and the snakes were actually the black folks. Well, go into the history. Why y'all scared to go into the history? Okay. Have a genuine conversation with folks. Because let me throw this out here. I'll give you another narrative in America that's similar to this narrative that's going on with Ireland, as well as our attitude in the mainland when it deals with black and white. When we talk about the islands, there was that part where we called them rednecks and stuff like that down there. But when you look at that history, and I'm not saying I know all about that history, but when you look at that history, you find that People from the mainland rolled their ass down there for quick money in the islands, this, that, and the other. Some of them motherfuckers was free, excuse my language, free, and they were able to come and go as they pleased. Okay. And other people were able to come up out of there before shit got bad. And some of those folks that you end up calling rednecks couldn't leave up out of that area. And they were what the person was saying, they saw them as beneath them. And that's where you get that redneck whole thing coming from the islands. Um, and it's kind of the same thing. Fuck you. I get mine, you get yours type stuff. And I get it. Self-preservation is the first law of nature, but when we gonna try to fix the situation? Anybody running around here fixing the situation? Because, like one brother said, the only way to fix our situation is if they drop a nuke on us, or you know, we on them, but we ain't got none. I'm just saying, but it's the same thing. Some people didn't get out in time. Okay, but anyway, let's start reading this chapter. I'm gonna try to get this one done in this reading so we can go on to the other one and we can find out what the blood sacrifice is. And I think that's where the Irish Republic comes in at Killer Croc. But let's start here on page number 239, reading chapter 11, The Struggle for Home Rule. Okay. It says Ireland lay shocked and hopeless after the Great Famine. She was, wrote Gavin Duffy in The Nation, like a corpse on the dissecting table. There was no leadership anymore, no great movement, no cause, no political club, no heroism, and no ideas. But a country cannot die, and everyone, British as well as Irish, knew what the sickness was. The Irish land system produced poverty instead of riches, hunger instead of food, enmity instead of cooperation, and clearly needed to be changed. Tenants had been enabled to improve their farms without risking an increase in rent or evictions. But it was easier said than done. Almost every member of the British Parliament came to the landed family, and while British landlords had little sympathy for their Irish counterparts, whom they thought selfish and irresponsible, they were afraid that any change in the law in favor of the Irish tenants would soon cross the water and affect what they considered their own just rights of property. Several bills to improve the lot of Irish tenants were drawn up, but all defeated. Another solution was to sweep out the inefficient and shiftless Irish landlords and replace them with highly skilled British gentlemen farmers who would instruct and encourage their tenantry and so improve the Irish estates. Encumbered estate acts were passed in 1848 and 49 to make the sale of estates encumbered with mortgages, entails, and family settlements easier. And before long, many hundreds of Irish landlords, almost bankrupt by the famine, had put their estates on the market. Land became very cheap, but the 300 or so buyers who did move in from Britain were not the good and improving landlords the government had hoped to attract, but speculators who promptly put the rents up so that they could get the best return possible for their money and evict those who could not pay. Tenants took matters in their own hands, encouraged by their priest. They began forming tenant protection societies in Ulster, where the price a tenant could obtain under the Ulster custom for his right of occupancy had fallen very low because of the reduced population, although rents remained as high as ever. Presbyterian ministers helped in the formation of an Ulster Tenant Right Association, which joined with similar associations in the South to form the Tenant Right League. The League commanded many thousands of tenant voters, and of the Irish members returned to Parliament in the general election of 1852, 40 were elected to the tenant right ticket. Within a few months, though, many of them had broken their elected pledge to the League. Its members lost heart and eventually it was disbanded. All idea of land reform was shelved. Then a fresh political impetus came from abroad. Following Smith O'Brien's abortive rising in 1848, thousands more Irishmen had followed the millions or so famine immigrants to America, continental Europe, and even Britain herself. The most radical had gone to Paris, where they could study the methods of revolution, and among them were James Stephens, a railway engineer from Kilkenny, who had been an aide de camp to Smith O'Brien, and his friend John O'Mahony, who came of an ancient land-owning family with a tradition of rebellion. Both his father and his uncle had been out in 1798. In 1854, O'Mahony left Paris for New York, where a quarter of the population was Irish, so he could raise men, money, and supplies for a new Irish revolt. And in 1856, Stephens went to Ireland. For the next 2 years, he walked all over the South and the West, an odd figure in his daintified Parisian clothes, searching among shopkeepers, artisans, and peasant farmers for past members of political clubs, traces of tenant right societies, and remnants of young Ireland, any dying embers of political fever that he might fan into a blaze. At first, he found nothing and no sense of nationality. Men of Connaught, for instance, seemed to regard Leinster men as foreigners, almost as strange as the English or the French. But there was plenty of discontent. Wages were low and landlords were rapacious as ever. And Stevens contrived to harness this discontent into a new patriot movement organized on the French Revolutionary model in a number of cells, each unknown to the others, to maintain secrecy. Mahoney, mm, mm, mm. O'Mahony, who had a deep love for the Gaelic past, named the movement after Fianna, the warrior who had followed the Gaelic legendary hero Fionn mac Cumhall as a Fenian Brotherhood, or the Fenians, Fenians for those who study it. The Fenians were the very opposite of the open, peaceful, and constitutional organizations of the 1820s and 30s with their aim of orderly and limited change. They wanted separation and revolution, the immediate and total overthrow of British power in Ireland, and they saw no other way of achieving it except but by force. They harked back to Wolfe Tone and Robert Emmet. They wished to take the literary violence of young Ireland and make it real. Recruits came in slowly at first. Though the Irish people looked favorably on Fenianism, they would not commit themselves. The Catholic Church habitually refused to condone sedition, condemned all secret societies, and excommunicated those who joined them. So in 1861, Stephen started a newspaper, The Irish People, which was considerably more extreme than The Nation, and took other opportunities for advertising the Fenian cause. When Terence Bellew McManus, the young Irelander who had taken part in the British Rising of 1848, died in California. His body was brought all the way back to Dublin for burial. Stephens drummed up crowds of between 20,000 and 30,000 people to line the streets and policed them with Fenian horsemen wearing a uniform of black scarves and armlets. It was among the earliest of those huge funerals staged to encourage popular support for an underground cause which had become such a feature of Irish life. In the same year, 1861, the American Civil War broke out. The Fenians gave up all idea of an immediate uprising, but placed their hopes on the experience of warfare that a brigade of American Irish, some 3,000 strong, was acquiring. When the war ended in April 1865, these American Irish veterans began filtering back into their home country, and there Stephens had done his work well. He was vain, boastful, and opinionated, but a brilliant organizer, and he had brought 200,000 people into the Fenian organization in Ireland. Many were not so much, many were not much more than sympathizers. That's interesting. Sympathizers, but 40,000 were armed. After a fashion or another, 12,000 were trained soldiers serving in the British garrison. Fenianism had infiltrated the British army so thoroughly that one-third of the troops serving in Ireland were sworn Fenians. Yet, when the rising came, the Fenians meant to avoid pitched battles and to fight. Hold on. Yet when the rising came, the Fenians meant to avoid pitched battles and to fight, not as regular troops, but in the traditional Irish way as guerrillas. Hold the motherfucking phone. Y'all remember when I did the Immortal 600 or the Immortal 300 that Janice Jean had hipped us to some years ago when she was talking about all these Egyptian type cemeteries and monuments down there in lower Georgia area and stuff like that. She mentioned the Immortal 300, and I read the book. And as I read the book on live on YouTube, we stumbled across, I don't know if it was General Bassett or Major General Bassett or Major Bassett's chat book. And in his chat book, which is just a small, little pamphlet type book, he had mentioned how during the Civil War, and mind you, the Immortal 300 goes into that Civil War area coming from Richmond and all of that, and it goes into the middle of the country, kind of like Missouri and all that area there before folks get sent back home. But he had mentioned how there was a group of people that would come in and basically erect their flag. They would pretend to be one thing, and then they would erect their flag, showing that there was somebody else. Um, that sounds like what they're talking about, but not over there, over here, or what do they mean by their home country when they talk about they went back home? Were they already over here? Because we've already seen people migrating over here because of the famine. Now, where are these homes and places like that that they've migrated to since the immigration of, 1848, 1849 during the famine? Are they in the middle of the country? I mean, because even right here, if we're talking about what we're looking at and how we're looking at this thing, when we talk about the Negro Act and I think the Stoner Rebellion and things along those lines, we're talking about the German Coast uprising. But right here, are we talking about another uprising that has infiltrated inside the community because or into the nation, if you would, because they masqueraded as British, aka Unionist, if you would. Okay, I'm putting some shit together to see what this shit is. And like I said before, how can you get the salt out the water? Okay. Fenian, F-E-N, I'll spell it. Because both those spellings that you have right there is wrong, and I got an idea of who you are. But I ain't gonna say nothing. So be kind on me, dear. Fenian, Fenians. That's the way they're spelling it in the book. Fenian. is the way that they're spelling it in the book. Okay. All right. So just the thought that I had right there about the Immortal 300 that plays in this same time frame of history. Let's go a little further. Okay, so the 12,000 trained soldiers serving the British garrison. Uh, okay, right here, here it is. Fenianism had infiltrated the British army so thoroughly that one-third of the troops serving in Ireland were sworn Fenians. Yet when the rising came, the Fenians meant to avoid pitched battles and to fight, not as regular troops, but in the traditional Irish way as guerrillas. Groups of Fenians were to destroy rail and telegraph links, attack police barracks, and harass government forces until the Fenian army arrived from America. In one major respect, however, the Fenians were to break new ground. Since the famine, so many thousands of Irishmen had immigrated in the initial attack need not be made in the mother country. Wait. Since the famine, so many thousands of Irishmen had immigrated that the initial attack need not be made in the mother country. When the Fenian leaders gathered in January 1867, they set up their headquarters in London, not Dublin, and made plans for an initial raid on the English town of Chester. The plan was for an initial raid on the, I'm sorry, the plan was a daring one. Fenians were to take over the British Army barracks and arms store in Chester Castle, seize the trains between Chester and the Welsh port of Holyhead, as well as the Irish um, packet boat, and rush the captured arms to Ireland, where the rising would have already begun. During the morning, Mhm. My phone is so hot. I don't want to stick it in the freezer again. Um, I really don't. Let's see. Let's try this. Okay. Um, Garrison. Oh yeah, begun. During the morning of the 11th of February, about 1,000 Irishmen traveled by train from Cree, Manchester, Warrington, and other northern English towns and gathered around Chester Station. At at the 11th hour, John McCafferty, who was in charge of the attack on the barracks, discovered that the plan had been betrayed to the British by an informer. He maintained to call off the attack and postpone the rising in Ireland, but the postponement was not to be for long. The Fenians had waited several years for action, and although they knew their chance of success had gone, they were determined. Sorry, y'all. Getting dark over here. Um, their postponement. Where are we at? Their postponement. Their postponement. But the postponement was not to be for long. The Fenians had waited several years for action, and although they knew their chance of success had gone, they were determined, in a desperate, foolhardy way, to carry on with the rising, whatever happened. They may have intended to make a grand, heroic, hopeless gesture in the legendary manner, but they ended up with a damp squib. Mm, okay. On the 4th of March, the leadership of London delivered a proclamation to the Times, which described in a fiery, desperately sincere tone of young Ireland what the Irish cause was. Quote, we appealed in vain to the reason and sense of justice of the dominant powers, end quote, the Fenians declared. Quote, having no honorable alternative left, we appealed to the force to force as our last resource. It is better to die in the struggle for freedom than to continue an existence of utter serfdom. All men are born with equal rights, end quote. They ended by proclaiming an Irish republic. Then the various leaders went to their posts for the rising the next day. But the informer who had betrayed the Chester raid was still with them. He took their plans to the British, and in the evening, the Fenian commander in Ireland was arrested on Limerick Station. Nevertheless, the next night, the Fenian or Irish Republic Army was on the march. Mhm. Two police barracks outside the Dublin area was taken. The columns of Fenians made their way to various rallying points, which were lit by rockets, and when they marched against the police at central points in the town and villages, they proved half-hearted. In the little town of Tallaght, Tallacht, 14 armed police dispersed many hundreds of rebels. In County Cork, the Fenians were more successful. They captured a Coast Guard station and a police barracks. Okay, never mind. And sabotaged railway lines, derailing the Dublin Express. Outside Tipperary, they tore up railway lines and telegraph poles. But in Drogheda, 1,000 Fenians were routed by less than 40 police, and in Limerick, 15 police at Kilmallock barracks held off a Fenian attack for 3 hours until they were relieved. Hmm. Okay. Until they were relieved. The rising was badly led, the Fenian leaders endlessly complaining, backbiting, and getting drunk in London. They had been prepared, armed, and aspired. They had not prepared, armed, or inspired their men. Yet they remained incurably optimistic, inviting the Americans, even after the rising had fallen flat on its face, to fit out your privateers with help from Ireland, just as Wolfe Tone had urged the French to do in 1798. And the Americans, like the French, responded. They loaded a privateer of 5,000 rifles, 1.5 million rounds of ammunition, and 3 mounted cannons. In late May, the vessel slipped into Sligo Bay, but on hearing it would receive no help from the people of Sligo, slipped out again and sailed on southwards. Still, the Americans could not find anyone willing to take their cargo of arms, and in June, when provisions began to run low, they sailed away again back to New York. The Irish Republic, proclaimed at the same time of the rising, had elected as its chief executive an American Irishman, Colonel Thomas J. Kelly. On the 11th of September, he was arrested in Manchester with another Fenian, Captain Daisy or Deasy, Deasey. A week later, a group of about 30 Fenians ambushed across a closed prison cart, taking them from the police court and released them. Wait a minute. A week later, a group of about 30 Fenians ambushed a closed prison cart, taking them from the police court and released them. Unfortunately, in what? Unfortunately, what? Unfortunately, in the fracas, okay, a police sergeant was killed. Four Fenians were tried and condemned to death for his murder. In English law, not only the man who shot the police sergeant was guilty of murder, but others connected with the attack as well. In the dock, the condemned men spoke with a kind of poetic heroism about the wrongs of Ireland. Quote, I would die proudly and triumphantly, said one, in defense of an oppressed and enslaved people. Look to Ireland, said another one. Look at what is called the majesty of the law on one side and the long, deep misery of a noble people on the other. Which are the young men of Ireland to respect? The law that murders or banishes their people, or the means to restrict relentless tyranny? End quote. Then all the defendants cried out in a large voice, God save Ireland. End quote. It was this spirit, this devotion of the men who are remembered as the Manchester martyrs, which won the people of Ireland to the Fenian cause. In December, there was another rescue attempt. The Fenian organizer of armament supplies had been arrested after the rising in March and sent to Clerkenwell prison in London. Y'all, it's a story about Clerkenwell, this lady, like a madam that was there or something like that. It's a cool little story about her. I remember seeing that name earlier. Okay, let me figure out what Clerkenwell in London. A group of Fenians trying to get him out blew up part of the prison wall, demolishing several houses and damaging many more. The explosion failed to rescue the Fenian prisoner, but killed 12 Londoners and seriously wounded 30 more. The British were outraged and frightened too. They saw the Irishmen in their midst as a menace, a danger that had to be contained. Special constables were recruited in England towns and cities to combat the Fenian threat. There were more than 5,000 of them in London alone. For a long time, the Irish had hated the British. For a spell, the British hated the Irish. But at the same time, the wiser among the people of Britain became aware, as they had never been before, of the problems of Ireland. And the Irish found that they had, most unexpectedly, a powerful British champion. A few days after Clerkenwell explosion, the leaders of the British Liberal Party told a public meeting that Irish violence was a result of Irish grievances, and it was Britain's duty to remove those grievances. The speaker was William Ewart Gladstone, a devout Christian who saw his mission in life as serving God in the highest manner possible, and that he believed was through politics. He started his parliamentary career in the 1830s with the usual British misconceptions about Ireland. He resigned from the government when Peel repealed the Corn Laws, and in 1853, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, or as Chancellor of the Exchequer, he made swinging, swinging, what is that? Swinging? That sounds weird. Increases in Irish taxations. Then, Britain had been generous been generous to her poorer neighbor in the matter of taxation, but Gladstone, like other Britons, was afraid that Ireland, if treated lightly, might become dependent upon Britain. He wanted Ireland to stand on her own feet. Yet many years, yet for many years. Hold on a second. Let me check the chat. Because I can't see the phone right now. Let's see where we at. We got enough. Okay. All right. Let's get back to it. Where we at? Page number 245. Looks like. I think we're on 245. Yeah, we're on 245. Okay. Yet for many years, he had regarded Ireland as wronged. In 1845, he had spent some time traveling in Europe and European statesmen. Yes, not as. Okay, in Europe and European statesmen, particularly the French foreign minister Francois Gazat, who Gazat had given him their view that the condition of Ireland was a blot on the honor of Britain. Ireland, Ireland, Gladstone had written in torment to his wife, that cloud in the west, the coming storm, the minister of God's retribution upon a cruel and inveterate and but half atoned justice. He was haunted by Ireland, and after Clerkenwell explosion, he felt the plight of Irish might be put before the British people. There was to be a general election the following year, and he decided the Liberal Party should fight it on an Irish issue. I'm sorry, I got to read this whole thing. Let me read that again. Yet for many years here, he had regarded Ireland as wronged. In 1845, he had spent some time traveling in Europe, and European statesmen, particularly the French foreign minister Francois Guizot, Guizot, had given him their view that the condition of Ireland was a blot on the honor of Britain. Ireland, Ireland, Gladstone had written in torment to his wife, that cloud in the west, the coming storm, the minister of God's retribution upon a cruel and inveterate and but half atoned justice. End quote. He was haunted by Ireland, and after the Clerkenwell explosion, he felt the plight of Ireland must be put before the British people. There was to be a general election the following year, and he decided the Liberal Party should fight it on an Irish issue. His speech after the explosion had been the opening salvo in the election campaign. At one time, Gladstone had wanted to be the clergyman rather than a politician, and it is not surprising that the issue he chose to fight the election on was the disestablishment of the Protestant Church of Ireland. Brought up a conforming Protestant and evangelical, he nevertheless had a broad sympathy for the nonconformists who bulked large in the Liberal Party and could carry them with him in the view that the establishment of the Protestant Church in a predominantly Catholic country, with all the endowments and revenues that establishment brings with it, was an injustice. Non-conforming liberals could appreciate how bitterly the established Protestant church was resented by the Irish people as a constant reminder of the Protestant ascendancy. A census taken in Ireland in 1861 has shown just how small the Protestant minority was. Out of the population of 5.75 million, Catholics of 5.75 million, Catholics accounted for 4.5 millions, and the members of the established Protestant church a mere 700,000. Over half of them lived in Ulster. In Leinster, they comprised 11% of the population. In Munster, 5%, and in Connaught, 4%. When Gladstone was put when Gladstone put those figures before the British people and described Catholic grievances, the Liberals were returned with a sizable majority. Gladstone was chopping wood, a favorite pastime, when he was given the election result. The mission, or he says, my mission, is to pacify Ireland, he told his informant. And for the remaining 30 years of his life, he bent his very considerable moral and intellectual energies to the task of reform in Ireland. In 1869, Gladstone's bill for the disestablishment of the Church of Ireland was passed. All the church's vast properties, its islands, buildings, except churches in use, and tithes, were confiscated by the state. One half was set aside to provide annuities for the clergy, schoolmasters, and various ecclesiastical officials, and the other to be administered for the benefit of the people of Ireland, for the relief of of poverty, encouragement of agriculture and fisheries, and endowment for higher education. At the same time, the annual grant to the Catholic Priest College at Maynooth and the regium donum paid to the Presbyterian ministers was commuted to lump sums. No church in Ireland was to be endowed with in any way by the state. Much church land had, of course, to be sold. Instead of making simple, straightforward transactions with the landlord class, the traditional way of handling such a situation, Gladstone slipped clauses into the act which gave the church's tenants the chance to buy their holdings with the help of mortgages given at a fixed interest rate of 4%. And over the next 10 years, over 6,000 tenants out of 8,400 took advantage of the offer and bought their holdings. Nowadays, when many Western countries are rapidly becoming property-owned democracies, Gladstone approach seemed normal enough, but in the 19th century, it was revolutionary. The clauses in the Irish Church Act governing the land tenure discreetly paved the way for a comprehensive Irish Land Act, piloted through Parliament in 1870, which gave the Ulster custom the force of law and tenants not covered by the custom of right, the right not covered by the custom, the right to compensate, the right to compensations. I apologize for improvements. In the past, the landlord was always presumed to have made any possible improvement, and an onus of proving otherwise placed on the tenant. Did I say that right? Let me say that right. In the past, the landlord was always presumed to have made any possible improvement, and the onus of proving oneself placed on the tenant. Under the new act, the position was reversed. The tenant was presumed to have made the improvement, which in Ireland was much more likely, and the burden of proving the contrary was placed on the landlord. If evicted, the tenant was entitled not excuse me. If evicted, the tenant was entitled not only to compensation for improvements, but also, and this was a new idea, for disturbance, provided his lease was for less than 31 years and his rent had been paid up to date. The principles involved were far reaching. Landlords regarded their relationship with their tenants as a personal one, which the state should not interfere with. But Gladstone had recognized that tenants needed protection and, more importantly, that the cultivator of the land had an equal interest in it, with the landlord collecting rents from it. Yet the act failed. The safeguards Gladstone had put into the bill were taken out of the by the Lords and Irish tenants. I'm sorry. The safeguards Gladstone had put in the bill were taken out by the Lords, and Irish tenants found their positions virtually unaltered. Competition for land was still so fierce that a prospective tenant was often prepared to buy his way into a tenancy, spending money which could have been used for improvements and occasionally to compensate a landlord for the cost of evicting a sitting tenant. Evictions without compensation were still easy enough. If a landlord raised the rent beyond what the tenant could pay, but not so much that the court would deem the increase in exorbitant, he could evict the tenant without compensation when inevitably he fell into arrears. I see you, Croc. Okay. Disappointed Irishmen turned once again to the idea of having their own parliament, not as the Fenians had advocated after a complete separation from Britain, but as a part of the federal arrangement. Irish MPs would still sit at Westminster, where foreign and imperial matters would be handled, but an Irish parliament would be responsible for domestic affairs, including the land laws. When Gladstone had disestablished the Church of Ireland, he had tampered with the Act of Union, which linked the Protestant churches of England, and Ireland. Irishmen had been much encouraged by that. It showed the Union was not, after all, succinct or sacrosanct. Sorry, sacrosanct. In 1870, are we gonna make it through all of this? Because the bitch getting tired. Yeah, okay. In 1870, a prominent Irish lawyer and MP, Isaac Butt, drew together, and that's B-U-T-T, drew together a group of nationalist Irishmen, some of them Protestants dismayed by disestablishment, some Catholic liberals and other Fenians, and formed them into a home government association. 3 years later, he superseded it with the Home Rule League. Hmm. Mhm. Rather like O'Connell's Catholic and Repeal associations, the Home Rule League had very low subscription rates, a member paying £1 a year and an associate member as little as a shilling. And very soon it became a genuinely national organization. In the following year, 1874, it put up its own candidates in the general election, 59 of whom were elected, a large enough number to make quite an impact on the House of Commons, provided they all acted in concert. Most, however, took the line that party discipline threatened their integrity, and but was not the man to coerce them. He had money troubles, so he spent a great deal of time away from London working at the Irish bar, and he held the naive belief that the best way of gaining points from the British was by being nice. Consequently, the Irish Home Rule Party failed completely to persuade or to pierce the indifference of the new conservative government until J.C. Biggar and a Belfast pork butcher, newly elected to Parliament, came to the fore. Tough, ugly, hunchback, and shrewd, Biggar, Biggar, or Bigar, developed a technique of obstruction in the Commons, which infuriated his British opponents. He would hold the floor for hours, um, interspersing his speech with extracts from a newspaper or passages from acts of parliament until the government program of business was thoroughly snarled up. But Bigger was too plebeian to become party leader. The Irish gentry, mm, it sounds like some people on YouTube. Anyway, um, the Irish gentry, who comprised most of the parliamentary Home Rule Party, would not follow a tradesman with a raspy Belfast accent. They wanted a leader with presence and an impeccable background, as well as shit, dynamism, dynamism. Okay, dynamism. Okay, there it is. Dynamism. There it is. Okay, and before long, they found him. In April 1875, a new member was returned for Meath in a by-election, an Anglo-Irishman, a Protestant with the English education, tall and handsome with the air of cool self-confidence beside great force and determination. He was Charles Stewart Parnell. Mm, mm, mm. Let me see. Struggle for home rule. Okay. A Parnell had moved from Cheshire to an estate in the Wicklow Mountains during the 17th century. In the 18th century, his descendants had come to identify themselves wholly with Ireland and the Protestant nation. They had opposed the Act of Union and supported Catholic emancipation. Parnell's mother was an American whose father had fought as an admiral against the British in 1812. She was virulently anti-British, and her son adopted her attitudes. Yet he had some English characteristics himself. Though intense and passionate, with the burning eyes of a fanatic, he had an English pride and reserve at the beginning of his political career. He was so nervous and inarticulate that his backers despaired. He had to push himself to become a fluent and forceful speaker. Parnell first took notice of politics when the Fenians rose in 1867. He was only 21 at the time and had no thought of joining them, but imbued with his family's tradition of nationalism, he felt a fervent sympathy for their aims. He saw the Home Rule Party as a alternative to Fenianism, more practical, less extreme, open instead of secret, using constitutional methods rather than physical force. But the intensity of the Fenianisms, I'm sorry, but the intensity of Fenianism always struck a chord in him. In the House of Commons, Purnell joined Biggert in the obstruction of Parliament business. He had no respect for Parliament, and in those days, the smooth running of the Commons depends on the certain respect, even affection, from its members. The two major parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, to form government, both had to form governments and take the responsibility of power. And it was an unwritten rule that the opposition would not impede a government bill, even a bad bill, if the result would be um, if the result would be serious disorder or revolution. It followed as a second unwritten rule that parliamentary business must not be unduly disrupted. The Irish Home Rule Party, though, had no intention of taking part in any British government. Its members were not afraid of revolution and believed that the public disorder could have been um, that public disorder could have been wait and believed that public disorder could have advantages. Okay, it was a third force in the Commons which had everything to gain from disrupting and obstructing the other parties, and his skill and ingenuity was put into developing obstructionist tactics. Parnell and Biggert disrupted government business by endlessly proposing innumerable amendments to bills, making interminable speeches, and calling for unnecessary divisions. In 1877, despite uh, desperate government ministers sought Butt's help, and Butt was foolish enough to give it. He delivered a public rebuke to Parnell, saying with great indignation that he disapproved entirely of the conduct of the honorable member for Meath. Um, it was the end of him. He had committed the cardinal sin of rebuking an Irishman in a foreign assembly, and afterwards his leadership of the home rulers were merely formal. He declined in both health and influence, and in 1879 he died. You guys, I'm tired. Okay, I'm literally tired. We're on page 250. I'm gonna bookmark this, and I'm gonna take me a little break. I'm gonna struggle through the rest of this because I just am. I'm literally hungry, and I need to go get me something to eat before it gets too late. Um, but ooh, I think it's interesting to see that Parnell had an American mother. Um, I think that's what it said there, and if we go back and look and see that, I wonder what they mean by American at that point. Okay, I mean, what they talking about? They sitting over there in the mountains of Ireland, and been there for generations. And then here come this this American woman to help birth these Irish descendants over there, and that's interesting right there. I wonder what she looked like and who she is, where'd she come from, and who are they calling American at this time? Even previously, when they were talking about, the Americans going over there and during their little wartime and revolutionary, campaign time and the armaments and all of this, I'm wondering who were those Americans? Okay, you know, at that time, who were those Americans? That's kind of weighing on my head right there. Okay, but yeah, family, I'm gonna take me a little well-deserved break. I wanted to give y'all a little bit. Sorry, I can't get through the whole chapter right now. My head is in various ways right now, and my tongue is giving me trouble again. So, how do we know if these books are telling the truth? We don't. We compare and contrast and use common sense and see what stands out to you. You may find other things that in your reading that may go against what's being said here. But the best thing you can do is research what's being said. You know, these official terms, these official groups, these organizations like Fenians. That's the first time I ever heard that, and I've never heard anybody say anything about it. Even though the one brother in the chat, Killer Croc, brother or sister, I think it's a brother, um, mentioned about the Irish Republic. But in mentioning the Irish Republic, he didn't mention the Fenians in there. You know what I'm saying? So, best thing you can do is check and, as they said on Sesame Street, two of these things, three of these things belong together. Three of these things are kind of the same. One of them don't belong. Shit. What they say, scratch a lie, find a thief, or something like that. Always got to know that they're in the midst. I mean, even here we see that there was some clandestine stuff that was going on. I think that's the right word to be using there. Um, so, but I read this and I look at this, and in my mind, I'm kind of mulling over, what did the Irish do that we didn't do? What did the Irish do that, um, how does this play with where we are and with where they are? I think in some aspects we traded places, but I can see some things that we just ain't fucking doing. If they end up being successful in any regards, I see some things that we just are not doing in relation to this. I mean, we twiddling our thumbs on a lot of shit. Okay. Half-heartedly doing stuff like they were talking about them, half-heartedly doing stuff. So, but family, I'm gonna take me a break at 2.5 hours. I guess that's all I can give y'all today. I'll see if I can come back at a later time and finish up on chapter number 11 on home rule. What is it? The search for home rule, the quest for home rule. What's that chapter name? The struggle for home rule. I mean, even when I'm thinking about this, family, and y'all gonna say, "Hey, that has nothing to do with this," but even when they talk about home rule, I was thinking about Noble Drew Ali, and when they slid over to Chicago and they started talking about home office. I'm just saying, okay. you know, as one brother said, mixed and mingled, twisted and screwed, flipped upside down, turned inside out. You know, maybe we can find out what happened, maybe we can't, but you know, getting information is better than just going by speculation and hearsay of others. Okay, so the family, I'm gonna go take me a nap. I'm gonna go get me some food, go take me a nap, go cook something, do something. Okay, but I'm a little tired right now. Okay, I'm pretty sure Smoke's gonna be up. Hopefully he'll come up today and I can sit there and listen to them folks do what they do and see if anybody's gonna be doing some obstructionist tactics and shit. Anyway, y'all, I do thank you guys for coming through. I don't know how many people in total were in here. I'm registering 3 people now. I know I had at least 7 in here at one point. For those people that were in here, I really appreciate you guys for still being interested in this and listening. And Jim, did you get your book? Did your book come and have you started reading your book? Oh, I forgot to put that spelling in. Let me shoot that in the chat. Um, that was the spelling for the Finian. Um, and you said you haven't started it. Okay, okay, I got you. All right. Um, and so even when we talk about this with the Irish, I don't know where when we say Irish in America, I don't know what comes up in your mind. I know what comes up in my mind. Um, but even when I was talking about the Swedes in relationship to the Finnish, and I-80 area and stuff like that, War of 1812, I mean, these are little nuances that need to be put into the narrative, even though it's going to be real difficult. Because when we talk about history, it gets real convoluted, it gets real detailed, and all of this stuff. But I think the Swedes come in here too, not in this reading, but in a subsequent reading to find out what was going on in the 1800s. Because without some of these stories that are coming out, my stumbling across shit, you know, most of what we will be talking about as far as the 1800s would be the Indian Removal Act, Dred Scott, and the 14th Amendment. And it's a lot more shit going on. Okay. You said white people, that's all that comes to mind. I know nothing about them. Okay. Yeah, and that's it. I mean, just adding some other nuances because there's a sister out here. I don't know if this is true, but there was a short out here of this sister that had a marketing campaign for a t-shirt for white folks. And it says, I'm white, but I'm not that white. See, we have a tendency to think all white folks are the same, and they're not. Okay. And the same thing over here on this side. Think everybody with dark skin is the same, and we're not. Okay. So, anyway, just like they talked about the Irish, where they thought that they were lazy in this reading here, and in another reading considered them to be lazy with all the shit that they're dealing with. They consider us in many regards to be lazy as well. And in some aspects, I say it too, not only of myself for certain reasons, but in some aspects as a collective, because we like taking the easier road now, because it seems like the harder road, you know, is just too hard for us to climb through, because we end up getting diverted into prison, jail, pregnancy, the streets, whatever the case is, and we don't go to those higher levels um, with the frequency that I believe that we should, you know. And so we down here groveling around domestic affairs when we should literally be on international ones, and we shouldn't have to say I'm a Moor or an African to do so and to do such. But what they said before, they said take them niggas over there because they won't compete. They talked about our folks not competing, and I could see some things in regards to that. It's like, put your head down, do what you got to do for you and yours, and forget this grand thing of we gonna all kumbaya come together, destroy the government and the pharmacy, and kick all the white folks off, and be God on earth. And I see why it comes into play. That's all I can say. You know, in some aspects they call us lazy, and in some aspects I can agree. We didn't got lazy, because when you go out here and you go out on a limb, a lot of times you go out on that limb by your goddamn self, and the rest of folks just looking to see what they can get out your pockets when you fall. Okay, I'm glad you are. I am too. Okay, Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I'm interested in seeing what happens or what is happening. I know some folks in my family who have connected their Irish, you know, into their lineage and this, that, and the other. It is what it is. Folks try to act like we was all just, keeping it in the family, and that ain't the case. Okay, you know. But anyway, y'all, I gotta go. I need to lay down. My head's hurting a little bit too. So, again, I appreciate you guys for coming through and listening. And I will try to get back and finish this chapter as soon as possible so we can get on and read some more and get to the end of this book and go on to something else, hopefully. All right. In the midst of all the melee shit that's going on right now. But, family, peace to you. Um, y'all have a great day, a week, and all that stuff. Again, thank you for coming. You are really appreciated. All right. So, family, I'm out. Can't do an outro because I ain't paying for this shit no more. It was a waste of money for many years. Okay. So, peace, family. See you soon.